My parents chose my brother over me. Now they shamelessly want my hard-earned money after my success.
My brother, Alex, was the golden child, the firstborn son, destined for greatness, at least in my parents' eyes. Me, I was just there, the younger sister, an afterthought. From the moment I could form memories, it felt like I was living in a shadow that was perpetually cast by his blinding light. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a visible, tangible reality that dictated every aspect of our lives. Our birthdays, for instance. We were born a year apart to the day, so we always had a joint celebration. But it was always, without fail, about Alex. His friends, his cake, his gifts. I remember one year, for our 7th and 8th birthdays, my mom got him a massive, professionally decorated cake shaped like a rocket ship, complete with little edible planets. It was incredible. My cake? A small, store-bought vanilla round with "Happy Birthday" sloppily piped on it. When I pointed out that it was boring and asked why I couldn't have a cool cake too, my dad just laughed and said, "Don't be dramatic. It's cake. Be grateful you have any." It was a small moment, but it stuck with me, a tiny, bitter seed of resentment. As we grew older, the favoritism didn't fade. It evolved into something far more insidious. Our differences became points of comparison, always in Alex's favor. He was a natural athlete, excelling at baseball and football. I was a bookworm, a quiet kid who preferred to spend her time drawing fantasy worlds and writing stories in a notebook I kept hidden under my mattress. My parents saw his athletic prowess as a sign of a strong, masculine future. My artistic pursuits were dismissed as a useless hobby that would never lead to a real job. They'd often make comments like, "Why can't you be more like Alex? He's out there making friends and being active, not sitting in a corner with his head in a book all day." The psychological toll was immense. I started to believe that my interests were worthless, that my personality was fundamentally flawed. I tried to change. I joined a few sports teams in middle school, but I was clumsy and uncoordinated. I tried to be more outgoing, but I was naturally shy. The harder I tried to be a version of myself that they might accept, the more I failed. I felt like a stranger in my own home, constantly performing for an audience that was already bored with my act. My only true escape was my art. My sketchbook was my secret sanctuary, a world where I could create my own rules and be the hero of my own story. The resentment toward Alex was complex. Part of me hated him for his ease, for the way he effortlessly won their approval. But another part felt pity. He was so caught up in being the person they wanted him to be, he didn't seem to have a personality of his own. He was just a perfect reflection of their expectations. We never had a strong sibling bond. How could we, when the foundation of our relationship was built on a zero-sum game of parental approval? The tension finally broke when I was 17. It was the summer before my senior year, a time that was supposed to be filled with anticipation and freedom. I had just been accepted into a prestigious summer arts program, a huge achievement that I had worked towards for years. The scholarship was competitive, and getting in felt like a validation of everything they had dismissed. I was ecstatic, finally feeling a glimmer of hope that I could prove them wrong. But they weren't impressed. "What will that get you? A job as a starving artist?" my dad sneered. My mom's reaction was more subtle, a dismissive shrug and a suggestion that I reconsider to focus on more practical college applications. The whole conversation felt like a slap in the face. My triumphant moment was reduced to nothing. Later that evening, in a fit of frustration, I yelled at them. I told them how unfair they had always been, how I felt like they didn't even see me, only a mirror of their failed expectations. I told them they were cruel and that I was sick of it. The truth of my words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. My mom started to cry, and my dad's face hardened. He didn't scream back. He just looked at me with a cold, disgusted expression and told me I was ungrateful and impossible to love. The next morning, the real blow came. Alex, who had been listening from his room, went to my parents and told them a lie so convincing, so vile, that it effectively erased any chance I had of reconciliation. He claimed I was using and selling drugs to my friends and had been for months, and that the summer arts program was just a cover. It was an outrageous, baseless lie, but he had a few details that made it seem plausible. He told them he had found a stash of pills in my room, pills he had planted there himself. My parents didn't even ask me. They didn't check. They just believed him. The disgust in their eyes from the night before had turned into a fierce, righteous rage. My dad held up a small baggie filled with a few aspirin pills and a crushed-up vitamin, his face pale with fury. "We've known you were a disappointment," he said, his voice shaking. "But a drug dealer? This is a new low." I tried to explain, to tell them it was a setup, that Alex was lying, but they wouldn't listen. They were so convinced of Alex's moral superiority that they couldn't even entertain the possibility of his deceit. They were furious that their perfect son was trying to protect them and their unlovable daughter was supposedly so far gone. My dad told me to pack a bag and leave. "We're done with you," he said. "Get out."
I walked out of that house with nothing but the small backpack I had managed to grab. The world felt like it had tilted on its axis. One moment, I was a teenage girl with a family, albeit a deeply dysfunctional one. The next, I was a stranger on the street, completely alone. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. My phone, which had been the source of the initial lie, felt heavy in my hand, a useless brick that connected me to nothing. The sun was setting, casting long, dramatic shadows that seemed to mock the darkness that had just swallowed my life. My first thought, strangely, was not of panic, but of a quiet, resigned relief. The pressure was gone. The endless striving for an approval I would never receive had ended. It was a terrifying freedom. I walked for hours, the cool evening air doing little to cool the hot shame and anger boiling in my chest. I considered calling my friends, but the embarrassment was too profound. How could I explain that my own family had thrown me out over a lie so ridiculous? They were still kids with curfews and parents who loved them. My reality felt like something out of a bad movie. I finally found myself at my friend Maya's house. I had no idea what I would say, but she was the only one who might understand, who had a fierce, unwavering loyalty. I rang her doorbell, a nervous tremor in my hand. When she opened the door and saw my tear-streaked face, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a tight hug and led me inside. Her parents, who were warm and kind, saw the state I was in and quietly ushered me to the guest room. They gave me space and a quiet, reassuring nod that made me feel more seen in that single moment than I had in 17 years at home. The next few weeks were a blur of numb exhaustion. Maya's family, bless them, didn't pry. They let me heal, providing a soft place to land. Her mom, Sarah, a former art teacher, saw me sketching one day and sat with me, not to critique, but to simply talk about art. She didn't know the whole story, but she knew enough to recognize that my art was my lifeline. It was her quiet encouragement that reignited a spark in me. I started drawing with a purpose again, pouring my pain and confusion onto the page. My sketchbook became my diary, the lines and colors a silent language for my grief. With their help, I finished the summer arts program online, working from Maya's living room. The director, after hearing a vague, sanitized version of my situation, was incredibly supportive. I was able to get a part-time job at a local coffee shop to save money, and slowly, a new path began to take shape. My grandmother, who had been my only ally in the old life, called me discreetly. She knew something was wrong. After I told her the truth, she was devastated. She told me she had known my parents' favoritism was toxic, but never expected them to go this far. "You are not a disappointment," she said, her voice shaking. "You are a gift, and their blindness is their loss." She sent me every last bit of money she had saved. It wasn't a fortune, but it felt like a king's ransom, an affirmation that someone, somewhere, still saw my worth. That money, along with what I had saved from my job, gave me the courage to take the next step. I found a tiny studio apartment above a bakery in a quiet part of town. It was small, with a single window that overlooked a brick alley, but it was mine. No one could mock me here. No one could tell me what I was or what I should be. For the first time, I felt like I was breathing my own air. I put my life into that little studio, painting and drawing for hours, the scent of fresh bread from below filling my space. My art wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was my purpose, a way to process the past and build a future. My pieces started to get a raw, powerful energy that people responded to. I started an online shop, selling prints and original pieces. The sales were slow at first, just enough to cover groceries, but it was enough. I was finally standing on my own 2 feet. I didn't talk to my parents or Alex again. I changed my number. The silence was deafening at first, but with each passing day, it became more peaceful. I didn't know what they were doing or what Alex had told them, and frankly, I didn't care. I was no longer their daughter, their disappointment, or the recipient of their cruel jokes. I was just me, and for the first time, that was more than enough.
The years that followed my departure were the hardest and, at the same time, the most rewarding of my life. My small one-bedroom apartment above the bakery became my cocoon, where I could shed the burden of my past and transform into the person I was truly meant to be. My online art shop grew slowly but steadily. I began to gain recognition on a local level, and my raw, emotional art resonated with people. These weren't the polished, commercial pieces you'd see in galleries, but works that spoke of pain, healing, and the search for one's own place in the world. One day, I received an email from a curator at a small but respected gallery downtown. He had seen one of my pieces on a blog about emerging local artists and was immediately fascinated. He offered me a solo exhibition. It felt surreal. The dream that my parents had dismissed as a useless hobby was suddenly my livelihood. The exhibition was a modest success. The reviews were good, but more importantly, people were buying my art. It was a deeply moving moment to see strangers connecting with pieces that had come from my deepest, most vulnerable feelings. I was no longer just an artist trying to get by. I was an artist who was earning a living. The turning point came a few years later. I was just 24, and my business was booming. My art had evolved. It was still emotional, but also more complex, more mature. I had saved up enough to buy a small apartment with my own studio. It was the first place I could truly call my home. One evening, I got an anonymous email. It was brief and contained a link to an article in a local magazine. The title was, "From a Talented Teenager to an Emerging Artist, the Story of Maya Miller." I shuddered as I read the article. It was a detailed story of my journey. It mentioned my early start, my unwavering will, and my extraordinary ability to turn pain into beauty. But the image in the article was what made my blood run cold. It showed me laughing, surrounded by my art. And right under the picture, it said, Maya Miller, the artist behind Eclipsed. They had identified me with my alias. The anonymity I had so carefully cultivated was gone. A few days later, my phone rang. I hadn't changed my number since I moved out. It was my mother. I froze. I had blocked her number years ago, but she was calling from a new one. My fingers hovered over the reject button, but a perverse curiosity I couldn't suppress made me answer the call. Her voice was sickly sweet as she greeted me after all these years. "Honey," she said, "I just read that wonderful article about you. It's so amazing to see how well you're doing. Your father and I are so proud of you." I couldn't believe the hypocrisy. Proud? They had kicked me out. They had branded me a drug dealer. The anger I had suppressed for so long boiled up. "Proud of what?" I asked, my voice icy. "Of what I achieved without you?" She immediately became defensive. She told me that the accusations from back then were a big misunderstanding, and that Alex was so dumb and naive and had no idea what he was doing. It was the same old song and dance she always used to excuse his mistakes. She told me that she and my father were in financial trouble. Business wasn't doing well, and they had debts. The subtle request was immediately clear. They expected me to step in. That I, the ungrateful, the impossible-to-love daughter they had thrown out, should bail them out of their mess. That's when I realized it wasn't about remorse.
It wasn't about a family reunion. It was about money. She asked if we could meet. "We would so love for our family to get back together," she said. I saw the whole manipulative agenda behind it. They didn't want to fix the family. They wanted to get their hands on the fruits of my labor. I told her I would think about it and hung up. I was shocked, but also empowered. They had given me the chance to find myself, and now that they saw the result, they wanted a piece of the pie. I took a deep breath, knowing the real conversation was yet to come. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon when I walked into the small cafe where we were supposed to meet. It was in a part of the city I didn't know, a conscious decision to prevent them from seeing my new life. My heart wasn't pounding with excitement or fear, but with a strange, cool resolve. I had prepared myself mentally, having transformed the anger of the past years into a cold, hard armor. I saw them sitting at a small table in a corner. They looked as if they had aged in the years since I had left, their faces more deeply lined with worry. When they saw me, my mother stood up and tried to hug me, but I stepped back slightly and simply took the chair opposite them. "Sweetheart, it's so good to see you," my mother said, her voice filled with a saccharine sweetness that made me shiver. "You look so well, and that article, we were so proud." My father nodded energetically. "Yes, Maya, absolutely proud. We always knew you were special." I let their words hang in the air. Proud? I waited until the silence became uncomfortable, then said, my voice calm, almost bored, "Let's be honest. You're not here because you're proud. You're here because you need money. And you're here because my anonymity is gone." The masks fell instantly. My mother flinched, my father looked away. The facade of a family reunion crumbled. It's not that simple, darling," my mother stammered. "We thought we could ask you to lend us some money to keep us afloat. Business hasn't been good, and the loans—" I cut her off. "You threw me out at 17, over a lie that Alex made up." My father looked up, his eyes flickering. "Alex was a teenager back then," he said. "He didn't understand what he was doing. He was just worried." I had to laugh, a short, bitter sound. Worried? He smuggled aspirin into my room to make it look like I was a drug dealer. He wasn't worried, he was jealous. And you believed it, because it fit your worldview, the image of him as the flawless hero protecting his family. And I was just the black sheep, the disappointing daughter you wanted to get rid of anyway. My father, who had been silent the whole time, raised his voice. "We made mistakes back then," he said. "We were young, inexperienced. We acted in what we thought was the best way." I shook my head. "Young? You were in your mid-40s. And inexperienced? You were my parents. You didn't just take away my home, you took away my self-worth. You made me feel like I was worth nothing." My voice got a little louder. "I spent years trying to heal those wounds. I did everything on my own. I built my own home, my own career, all without you. I'm not a hero, I'm a survivor." My mother was crying now, tears running down her cheeks. I didn't know if it was genuine remorse or just one last attempt at emotional manipulation. I had no desire to find out. "We were always a family," she said, her voice a mere whisper. "Family helps each other." The words stung like a dagger. "We were never a family," I said softly. "Family loves unconditionally. Family supports each other. You never did that." I took a deep breath. "No, I will not help you. My art is my life, my income, and it belongs to me. You gave me the chance to learn that when you threw me away, and I took it." I stood up. They looked at me disbelieving. They had so firmly believed in their manipulative narrative that my direct resistance seemed to surprise them. "I hope you find your way out of your mess, but I won't be that way. I'm not sorry to say that. It's the only truth I accept now." I turned and walked out of the cafe without looking back. The sun was still shining, and the day was warm, but the cold weight I had carried for so long was gone. I was finally free. The true freedom was not just the independence I had built, but the realization that I owed nothing to anyone who had never given me anything. This wasn't the story of a family reuniting.
It was the story of a woman who became her own family, just herself.